what it needs to do to get to net zero by, say, 2040.
OK. I'm afraid we are out of time. This is far too important a subject to only spend 10 minutes on, so forgive me. We ran out of time. There's so many questions we wanted to get through. Our hour is up. Thank you very much to all of you on the panel. Thank you, all of you, very much for coming along, Newcastle Under Lyme. And, of course, thank you for watching Question Time. From Newcastle Under Lyme, until next week, bye-bye.
Are we ready, yeah?
We should have stood up to him then. What is happening now is the turning point.
I get flashed at hundreds of times a day online. I need them to just acknowledge that what they've done is wrong so that I could take it all off me.
I'm giving 4 autistic people the chance to bring their experiences to life.
I've got a voice.
Press red to watch now on BBC iPlayer.
You're not the only one finding mealtimes tough. Over 1.1 million of us have read Family Meals for £1 on the BBC. For cost of living tips and advice, go to bbc.co.uk.
I'm back on the hunt for the UK's next top food and drink entrepreneur.
I'm so ready for this.
I'm going unfading.
I want to invest £150,000 of my own cash into one of them.
Action.
And catapult their business to the next level.
Winning this competition would literally change my life.
I'm not giving the money away easily. They'll need to earn it. If anyone can't give me a standard, then please go home.
This one is a mess.
Do not let me down.
Gordon Ramsay's Future Food Stars returns next Thursday at 9 on BBC One and iPlayer.
Follow the money, the gold, the inside story of Britain's biggest bullion heist in half an hour. Right now, though, big Westminster events to chew over.
Now, one of the big TV events of the week was the return of Challenge Annika on Channel 5 at the weekend. And we marked that moment on the Newscast podcast, available on BBC Sounds, by speaking to Annika herself. And it turns out she listens to Newscast, and she had a little challenge for you, Chris.
Indeed. So this was all about... Well, Annika, you should tell us.
Well, she's here now.
Yes.
Hi, Annika.
Oh, it's so nice to be chatting to you, Chris.
It's lovely to chat to you.
You were doing so well with some little personal challenges you were doing in your life. I thought you were ready for a bigger one. World Poetry Day.
Yes.
Write a poem in the form of haiku.
Yes. Well,
How did you do?
Well, I mean, fortunately, obviously, I've got no end of spare time in weeks like this politically, so I could devote
It's been
hours.
really quiet this week.
It really has.
Really
so I could
quiet.
devote every waking hour to the pursuit of haiku, and I can now, rather with nervous trepidation, debut the premiere of the Mason haiku. So here we go. I'm worried about syllable counts and all of that, as well as delivery.
575.
Here we go. A week of blonde men. Boris's party's back on air. Trump arrest? How fair?
I can't clap because it'll be knock the microphone, but bravo. Yeah.
Is that it?
Annika, you know how long a
Yes,
haiku
I
is?
suppose haiku is very short. Yeah, no, I was settling in. I have got a small glass of something just out of shot, and I was settling in. I forgot the haiku was just... Can you say it again, Chris?
Yeah, go on.
Here we go.
I
Second
didn't
time.
really listen.
Yes, it deserves a
I was
second
just getting
outing, as I'm
into
sure.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sure
it
what you were
does.
about to say. Yeah, here we go. Here we go.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
it? Honestly.
Yeah. Sorry.
Here we go.
It's not such a big challenge as I thought now. Now I'm thinking about it.
It's hard writing
It
haiku,
was.
Annika.
It was.
I mean, it's not
have
building
said
an animal
sonnet
sanctuary in
form.
24 hours, but...
Honestly, yeah. When I was awake at 3:30 this morning penning these words, it felt like one heck of a challenge. A week of blonde men. Boris's party's back on air. Trump arrest? How fair?
Oh, it's beautiful, Chris.
Thank you, Annika. That's what I was. That's what
Lovely.
I was hoping for.
I think
Thank
I'm
you.
disappointed now I didn't say it in the form of the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, so it could have gone on for
An
pages,
epic-
because
an
I think
epic
you've got
poem.
real skill there. An epic.
Oh, thank you.
Now, Annika, I was going to ask if you're
that's
out on
brilliant. Yeah.
I was going to ask if you're out on a challenge right now, but you just said you're having a glass of wine, which makes me think you're not.
Well, I am. Today has been very challenging because I've been painting with Maggie Hambling, our greatest living painter, all day. And then I've come on now to a club where I've met up with Ronnie Wood, who's a friend through painting. We met because he just got in touch with me and said, I really like your line drawings. Let's meet up. Next thing I know, I'm backstage in Paris on tour with him. Anyway, he's playing tonight a gig. And the other lovely things, I tell you, my life is like going down a rabbit hole. 30 years ago, we did a lovely challenge for a charity called Aspire, which is a spinal injury charity. And he's singing tonight to raise money. How lovely is that as a full circle vibe?
Oh, that's fantastic.
Wow, 2 TV legends, you and Annika Rice.
So, tell you what, that's my poetry days coming and going in one go. I think that's it. High point and low point all in one. That's it.
Right, let's have a fully prose-based episode of Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
And Chris in the studio.
And shortly we'll be joined by a former leader of the Conservative Party, but not one of the prime ministers that rebelled over Brexit this week. So that narrows it down.
Yeah, to a few.
This is
it?
like a pub quiz.
Yeah.
And that comes after. That comes after the show. Right. So today, a big figure left the political stage. Nicola Sturgeon had her last ever episode of First Minister's Questions because after Monday, she's not the First Minister anymore.
It was her, 286th or 7th, I think?
It was a lot. And this is how she sounded. And actually, spoiler alert, she's quite emotional.
Words will never adequately convey the gratitude and the awe I hold in my heart for the opportunity I have had to serve as your First Minister. It truly has been the privilege of my lifetime. And with these words, Presiding Officer, I draw it to a close.
And yeah, then the other party leaders just dived in with loads of party political points, like a classic First Minister's Questions. But I suppose Nicola Sturgeon's immediate political legacy is quite a lot of chaos in her party as they pick a successor.
Yeah, so we'll hear who the new First Minister is going to be on Monday. And yeah, I think the extraordinary thing, firstly, the very human moment for Nicola Sturgeon there, to have reached the pinnacle of her trade, I suppose. I know she hasn't delivered the very thing she'd have loved to, which is Scottish independence, but to have done the job that she has done for so long, but to have done it in a way, her and her husband as the chief executive of the party, where there was this, if you like, discipline, and you would see it. You would see a discipline in the SNP with her as leader, Peter Murrell as the chief executive, where you didn't get the outbreaks of kind of argument in public that you would within the Conservative Party or the Labour Party. Then she announces she's going, and suddenly you see the sort of edifice of that discipline breaking down. And you do wonder what that'll mean for the new First Minister. Is that kind of a more pluralistic spirit that some might see as a good thing? Or does it kind of look dysfunctional, as SNP people have been acknowledging over the last few weeks it kind of has been, with this row over the who gets to vote and the size of the party membership and all the rest of it.
And it's the day after Boris Johnson gave more than 3 hours of evidence to the Privileges Committee, who are deciding whether he misled Parliament in his various statements about Partygate over the years. I'm quite surprised on the one hand that it's disappeared from the headlines so quickly, but actually then when I think about it rationally, it's like, well, it was just part of a process and we've still got to wait a few months for the actual outcome.
Yeah, so I reckon it's going to be late spring, early summer before we get that outcome. Privileges Committee trying to work out, did he inadvertently mislead Parliament? Did he recklessly mislead Parliament? Or did he intentionally mislead Parliament? Proving intent really hard because you're going to get us into someone's head unless there's some sort of email that says, I'm going to go to Parliament at lunchtime today and tell them a load of nonsense, which there doesn't seem to be, at least not that the committee's got. So they are going to go away, might get a bit more evidence yet, work out what they can conclude and agree on. They don't have to agree, but it kind of helps their case if they come to a unanimous conclusion. I think the interesting thing is, can they agree and, as they would see it, prove that he recklessly misled Parliament? And that's the most dangerous political charge that stands a reasonable chance of being able to be thrown around Boris Johnson's neck. He would vehemently deny that he did do that. Is that what the committee comes to a conclusion on? And then, crucially, does Parliament endorse that sanction or whatever sanction they attach to that?
And at lunchtime, the Bank of England put interest rates up to 4.25%, which is a lot higher than the nearly 0% that they were for very many years. So that gives us lots of interesting things to talk to the former leader of the Conservative Party, Serene Duncan-Smith, who's here. Hello.
Hi.
I know you really want to talk about TikTok, which
yes.
might surprise people for your demographic, that you're big into TikTok.
Talk about it, not on it.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't it? You're not looking at like dancing cats, but we'll come on to that in a minute. So you didn't watch the 3.5 hours of Boris Johnson at the committee. Did you have something better to do? Something better to watch?
The funny thing, I didn't actually, because I watched bits. I had little bits where I'd walk into somebody else's office and they'd have it on. I watched for about 3 or 4 minutes and left. I just had lots on yesterday, doing things, talking to people, various meetings, and it didn't occur to me that I should cancel any of them to go and sit in an office and watch it. A bit like watching paint dry, really, I think. Less exciting.
Well, let's see when we watch a little bit of it, just to remind people what some of it was about. This is Bernard Jenkin, the Conservative MP, asking Boris Johnson about how the COVID rules were followed or sort of followed in Downing Street.
We know that the gathering attracted fixed penalty notices. So, in fact, the police have judged that it broke the rules. Why did you think it was within the rules?
I thought it was essential for work purposes, or at least reasonably necessary for work purposes, because for the reason I've given Sir Bernard, that November the 13th was a day in which 2 senior officials, senior advisors in government, had left their jobs in very, very difficult and challenging circumstances. And it was necessary to steady the ship. It was necessary to show that there was no rancour, that the business of the government was being carried on. That's what we had to do. That's what I had to do.
I wonder what you make, Serene, of the spectacle of it, from what you've heard and seen, and Boris Johnson's defence.
Well, I wasn't. From what I understand and what I've read and the little bits that I saw and talking to colleagues, I don't think anybody discovered some answer that wasn't already pretty much there. That his defence was exactly probably what you would have expected, except longer. And those questioning him were trying to score a point as far as I can make out. Now, whether you believe he was guilty of something or not guilty or deliberately misleading the House or something is another matter. But I did think it, for it to lasted that long, was pretty torturous, really. And, what are they doing? Originally in Erskine May, for many of your listeners and watchers,
parliamentary kind of rule book.
It did actually say that the charge is always knowingly. Well, the committee dropped that and tried for a wider bracket of charges, which was not actually, hasn't gone through the House of Commons to be agreed on. It was always that the thing is, did you do it knowingly? If you did it knowingly, that's an offence. If you did it misadvertently and you come back and you apologise or correct or whatever the note is, I was a minister, sometimes you gave out evidence, then you went back and they said, no, you got the figures wrong, and you then corrected the record, or you went back and apologised as necessary, which is normal practice. So I just kind of thought this was done to make this more intrusive and longer term. And people make their own minds up about it at the end of the day, but I don't know what we discovered from this that was new or anything else.
Let's talk about TikTok. You mentioned it a few minutes ago. We've seen today Parliament say that it's going to ban TikTok, and people won't even be able to access it on a personal device if they're using parliamentary Wi-Fi. We saw the government, was it last week, relatively recently, saying it shouldn't be on government devices either. You're long-time sceptic as far as China is concerned, sanctioned by Beijing.
Indeed I am.
And we've seen this colossal
and my
shift.
family.
And your family. And we've seen this colossal shift, haven't we, in UK foreign policy attitudes towards China in just the last 7 or 8 years, from David Cameron and the Chinese president having a pint in a pub in Oxfordshire to a more sceptical outlook now, but perhaps not as sceptical as you'd like to see. What do you make of this TikTok ban?
Well, I've been campaigning on TikTok for some time. And, of course, in China there is a national security law that mandates every company, individuals too, that when required must pass all data they have over to the intelligence services. Peradventure, you'll be arrested if you don't do it. And the reality about this is ByteDance, which owns TikTok, is locked heavily to lots of suppliers inside China who also pass their data over regularly. So the real issue is TikTok is a data harvester, but with an ability to be able to use that data for malicious intent via a foreign government. And at last, America's ahead of us on this one. and lots of other countries have acted earlier, but the British government's finally decided it should be banned from their telephones. But I've argued, and I'm pleased that Parliament has acted so swiftly, but I've argued that individual ministers should have it off their private telephones, because they have their telephones in their offices, they use them, they talk to each other on them the whole time, often about government business. We say, well, they shouldn't be doing that.
It's just the same then, isn't it, really, arguably?
Well, it's exactly my point. So if you're going to ban it from a government telephone, ban it from the minister's telephone while they're a minister.
And just to give TikTok a right to reply, as they're not here to defend themselves, they insist that they do not share data with Chinese officials. There's a bigger picture question here, Ian, which is where does it leave our relationship with China?
I think things have moved on quite fast. I think the golden decade was a major mistake, personally, but it's got worse since
David
then.
Cameron and George Osborne, I mean, big time cozying up to China.
Oh, I know.
In the cabinet you were in.
I was, yeah. I did make some comments about it, but I'm not going to break into the confidentiality. But this is a country growing in power, growing in assertiveness, and I just draw attention to something which has gone missing because of all the other stuff going on in the House today, but it's far more important than all this stuff this week, was that President Xi, at the end of his banquet, turned to President Putin and said something along the lines of that we are seeing changes to the biggest there have been for over 100 years. And then he goes on to say, and we will control those changes together. Now, this is a man who has created a war in Ukraine, huge abuses, human rights threats, and another man, another authoritarian state, very powerful, full of money and lots of technology, is basically saying to him, we're together over changing it. And I know what he means. What he's saying is our form of government, our essential unelected dictatorial form of government, is the right government for the world, and we are going to win through against these flaky democracies at some point. This is a real challenge to us, and if we don't want to face it as we run with our businesses to them to get cheaper labour and all the rest of it, all we should recognise is every time they're doing it, they have a very clear purpose. We don't.
How do we respond to it then? Because there's a challenge, isn't there, for Western democracies, that the whole of society, the whole of the corporate world, on the democratic model, is not an instrument of foreign policy in the way that it can be in a state like China, which I guess arguably in a blunt sense puts the West at a strategic disadvantage. But at the same time, we want to preserve, Western governments, Western nations want to preserve the very essence of what the democratic model is all about. So how does the West face up to China?
Well, I think it's hugely about recognising the nature of the scale of the threat that we've built up. I mean, British businesses and German businesses, American businesses, all rushed to China in that last 20 years, all done business with China. President Xi has changed the terms of the games on arrival. He's decided that that is going to be on their terms. So this idea of moving to democracy or freedoms or freedom of expression has all been stopped. It's been reversed completely, taken over Hong Kong. So it's the recognition that something changed in China that has gone missing in Western governments' belief. And what they're feared of is that they'll upset China and therefore lose business. This is the drive. We compete with each other the whole time in the West, so nobody wants to see another country get an advantage over us because we're now calling China out. And I think the point is we've just got to sit down and thrash this out together, because what is at risk, I genuinely believe it, I hope I'm not scaremongering, is the very way we live our lives, the things that we take for granted, the freedoms, the debates that we've had in the House of Commons. These things have been hard fought for, but for President Xi, he thinks they're a 200-year aberration, and the natural form of government for the world is his form of government. And that is the challenge. Now, we saw it before. It took us ages, and finally we stumbled into it in the 1930s and recognized it was a terrible threat, but it cost 60 million lives to put that one right. We faced it during the Cold War, but the lesson we had learned is you have to be strong in the face of authoritarianism. And at the end of the day, that collapsed in front of us. But then we made this great thing that thought, well, we've won now. There'll never be another problem. Not true. And this is now rising in plain view. The difference is China recognized something about the Soviet Union. It wasn't economically powerful, so the West was able to beat it. They are economically powerful, and they've taken away that one lever that we had over the Soviet Union, and it's a different game altogether now.
Another subject, we're getting through them all this time, the economy. So interest rates up again at lunchtime on Thursday. Inflation surprisingly up in the last few months, which people didn't expect. As the granddaddy of universal credit, the big new bit of the benefit system, do you think universal credit is coping with this massive hit to people's living standards in the way that it was intended to? Because the whole point about universal credit is it's mega flexible. You can take it up, take it down. It adds to people's incomes as their circumstances change.
You know, UC is performing, and that's why we persuaded, and I'm pleased with the chance of the budget, to do what I'd wanted to do, which is to add the other bit to UC, which is universal support, universal credit, universal support. That's because for the first time, universal credit identifies whole household income. Means now we know who are really coping and not coping. So what we can put alongside that is ways of getting those families that don't cope into remedial help, sorting them out, whether it's debt, drugs, whatever, and then getting them back into the work process. So UC is flexible in that regard. How the government sets the taper is important, because if you drop it down, which is what they've now done, it means more people keep more of their income on the way through the benefit system. And of course, it's proved itself working during COVID, because without that, many people would have died because they'd have been queuing up in job centres catching COVID. So it was very flexible. Over 1 million people were taken on in about 3 weeks in COVID. You couldn't have done that with the old legacy systems. So obviously keeping going and changing it is absolutely key. But when it comes to inflation, again, I saw America's put up their interest rates. They're worried. This last bout of increased inflation, unpredicted, in a way you can argue should have been, because this dates back to the period when you actually started planting the crops, when the cost of energy was really high. This is about 2 months after the war in Ukraine starts. You know, when they've harvested, now they're looking to replant. It's that point where energy's high, fertilizer costs are through the roof. I know, because I have some family that have a farm. All of those have taken this period to come through to the harvest price, and that's gone into the network, and then the result is the price suddenly shot up to reflect those. Whether that continues or it comes back down at the next session will be the debate, but I think the bank had no other option, sadly, but to raise interest rates. I hope they'll bring them down fairly soon if this doesn't go through.
Final question. I read in various places, Ian, that you might have at some point acquired an extra I in your name. Were you born I-A-N and then an extra I popped in at some point?
No, we added it. My father insisted on it later on.
Oh, right.
Because, of course, I was born in Scotland.
Right.
And he was a proud Scot.
Right.
And he said, when it was put on the register, he then later on said, this is not the right spelling.
Oh, right, so it was put on the register as I-A-N, the kind of,
right.
if you like, English way of
It's
spelling
the
it.
anglicised way of spelling it. And he said to me when I was about 10, I think it was, or maybe a bit earlier, I'm not sure, but I seem to recall he said to me, I want to change this, and you should have it I-I-N. I said, fine. And, you know, to be honest with you, I didn't know much of the difference by that.
You know, my first name's actually Robert. So
No,
I'm
I
Robert
didn't know
Adam
that.
Fleming.
I've known you for 20 years, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but I don't go for the whole 3-name things. Just Adam Fleming will do. But on my passport it says Robert Adam Fleming. For any identity theft people out there.
Well, actually, my first name is George.
Oh, right, okay.
But I've never.
How many names have you got?
Just George Ian. But that was all. So I was called Ian.
Right.
Thanks for giving us lots of food for thought, Ian Duncan-Smith.
Pleasure.
Now for something completely different. This week the BAFTA nominations came out, and there were 6 for the big BBC One drama, The Responder, which is where Martin Freeman plays a police officer in Liverpool. And we can now congratulate the writer of that show, Tony Schumacher. Hi, Tony.
Hello. Yes. Congratulations. What a, I mean, it's quite something, although harvesting so many nominations.
It's incredible. It's so exciting. It's amazing. I mean, obviously, I'm totally conscious that we're not going to win anything, but that's all right. You know what I mean? I set myself out like to just make this television show, and 6 nominations for the BAFTAs is just beyond anything that I was imagining, so it's incredible.
Well, for the 8 people in the country who didn't see it when it was on, it's available on iPlayer. Here's a little taste.
Do you want to be a good Bobby?
He's a mess.
It's important work.
I think it's whack-a-mole. Except the mole's worth trackies.
You're working for Carl Sweeney, aren't you?
Why is he so angry with you?
Because I robbed his cocaine.
You are?
Now, Tony, I mean this in the nicest way, but there are quite a lot of cop shows at the moment. What made yours different?
Do you know what? If I knew that, I'd no. You know, I think the reality of it. I think because I was a cop for nearly 13 years, and you know, I'm sure that played a large part of it, the authenticity of it. But also, like, you know, I love a good cop show, you know, so I'd never criticise anyone who's making them. But I wanted it to be as real as it possibly could be, you know. So let's have a bit of humour, let's have a bit of darkness, and let's you know, make it about the people who aren't committing the murders, the people who aren't, you know, doing these high-profile crimes, Let's make it about the little people, the small people, you know, and just enjoy being in their company.
How do you find it now when you sort of look in on, as an observer from the outside, policing? And particularly, I guess, when you see, like in the last few days, policing in the news. We've had this report, haven't we, from Louise Casey, the Baroness who was looking into the Met Police and the culture and standards there. How do you... I don't know, how do you sort of weigh that up, consider that, ponder that when you see it now as an outsider, but someone who spent so long on the inside?
You know, you spend hours... You get really introspective, to be honest with you, Chris. And I start thinking about, did I work with people like this? You know, when you hear about these terrible WhatsApp groups and stuff, you think, did I work with people like that? Did I know those guys? Like, and just didn't realise it was happening. But what's interesting is...
How do you answer that question? Did you?
I don't know. I mean, you wouldn't know, would you? You don't know. I work with two bobbies who I thought were really very, very, very close friends. And after I'd left the job and I was driving a taxi for a living, trying to make my way as a writer, I picked up the Liverpool Echo one night and their mugshots were on the front page. And you think, what? I thought I knew these people.
They'd done something bad.
Yeah, the pair of them went to prison for corruption. And, you know, so you have this weird thing where you sort of... It's difficult to say, you know, do you know these people? Because by definition, you don't know. You just don't know. But there's aspects of the recent reports and there's aspects of WhatsApp groups and there's, you know, and you do look at that and you do think, you know what, maybe it is there, you know, it definitely is. But what was interesting was this morning, funny enough, I spoke at Merseyside Police about mental health and policing. They'd invited me in years ago before these BAFTA nominations come out and my fee went up, you know. But, I went in to talk to them. And what was quite interesting was, for me, who joined the police in 1996, was the difference in supervision. It felt different. It felt more professional than when I joined. Now, whether or not that's just because I'm in a police training centre where recruits are coming in and everyone's trying their best, I don't know. But it felt better. Fundamentally, policing is, you know, it's in a state of flux. I think society is changing so quickly now, and police forces are struggling to cope. You look at what's happening in the Met, you know, with the Casey report. It's, you know, we've got police forces in special measures around the country. I think GMP was in special measures for a while. You know, there's real problems, and I think the issues like this come from the top. We see it in government, you know, with Boris Johnson in government, when he was at the helm, that if you've got somebody at the top in management, I'm not talking at the very, very top, I'm talking about senior management who are maybe not doing the job in a way that it should be done. People will let their own standards slide, you know. And if the barrel's rotten, you're going to get more bad apples. There's no getting away from it. If the barrel's wet and rotten, your apples inside are going to get rotten.
And when you go to the BAFTA ceremony, do you think actually it'll just be a bunch of posh people because actually the industry is dominated by people from wealthy backgrounds?
I would say that it won't be a bunch of posh people, but it'll be a bunch of people who, upper middle class people who mean well and want to do good things in the industry. But there's no getting away from it. Outside of actors, there won't be many working class people there. You know, I've been to meetings sometimes where I've felt like a novelty almost. I've felt like a novelty. That I'm in a room and people have like kind of come in, so what's the working class guy, jump up and down and shout, you know. I mean, I've got to tell you now, lads, this is my telephone voice. You know what I mean? When I'm on one, like, you wouldn't get a word out of me. You would not understand the word I'm saying. It's really frustrating. I said to one of the guys the other week, I don't think I've worked with so many people in my life called Toby. In fact, outside of television, I don't know anyone called Toby. If you call Toby where I am, you're a dog. You know, it's a strange thing like that. And you know, you hope that people like me coming through will get a few more on the table. You know,
is it changing though? I mean, I often wonder. I mean, I'm a kind of middle-class kid from North Yorkshire, but I don't.
From Yorkshire, Chris.
But I don't think somebody who sounds like I do would have been BBC political editor a generation ago. So I think there is a change that's happening, and I guess is it happening in Is it happening in your world of television as well? And is it? Do you see that change happening?
I feel like a bit of an outlier, to be honest with you. Whether or not I am, or whether or not that's my own prejudices, I don't know, you know. And there's a big thing as well, is that I don't want anyone who's, you know, middle class or upper middle class, I don't want anyone feeling bad about doing what they do. I want people to do what they do and love what they do. All I want is I want people to just think about, you know, reaching out to other communities.
Tony, before I let you go, do you want to give us the scoop on what's coming up next, what you're writing next, or is it going to be Responder 2?
It is Responder 2, but I'm also doing a couple of other projects, both with the BBC, which is exciting because I just love the BBC, and I'm not just saying that because you're paying me mortgage. It is, I think the BBC is one of the greatest organisations on earth.
Well, from a BBC One programme that hasn't been nominated for any BAFTAs. Thank you to somebody who's worked on a BBC One programme that gets millions of viewers and loads of BAFTA nominations. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Nice to chat. Cheers, Tony.
Cheers.
And you know what, Chris? There will be a sequel to this episode of Newscast available, as always, on BBC Sounds very soon.
Seamlessly done.
You're not giving me any awards for that link, are you?
No, I'm not for best linking screenplay, also available as a podcast.
Anyway, thanks for spending time with us. We'll be back very soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Anton and Gio have swapped the ballroom for sunny Sicily.
I want to see where you grew up. I want to see where you learned to dance.
But you know what they say? What goes on in Sicily...
She's madly in love with you.
...doesn't strictly stay in Sicily.
Of course I'll have a family one day. You'd be a wonderful father. This is just the beginning.
Anton and Giovanni's Adventures in Sicily. Press red for all episodes on BBC iPlayer.
New series, new crimes, same cleaner.
What the hell happened?
Someone chopped his head off.
Get out!
Can you clean it or not?
All right, Midsummer Murders, keep your clogs on. Push me up.
So many characters around here.
You poke me again. You won't need that red nose.
Adorable.
What? Fun's over. Clean up time.
The Cleaner starts tomorrow at 9:30 on BBC One and iPlayer.
Have you watched drama The Gold yet? Well now, and with some strong language, BBC One keeps it real to bring you the inside story of the extraordinary heist.
Unit 7 on the Heathrow Trading Estate is a top security warehouse. Shortly before 7 o'clock this morning, 6 men carrying guns and wearing balaclava helmets burst in.
The armed raiders threatened to turn the guards into human torches by dousing them with petrol.
Another guard was pistol whipped, and eventually all the guards ended up in hospital.
When we arrive on scene at the Brinksmat warehouse, we found the guards were in a terrible state of distress. Their clothes had been cut off them, they'd been doused in petrol, they'd been tied up, handcuffed.
The gang escaped with £26 million worth of gold bars.
Weighing altogether about 3 tons.
Well, it's patently obvious right from the start that it was a very professional job carried out by a well-organised and professional team. How on earth someone could have come by the information that led them to turn up at that warehouse that day with all that massive amount of gold?
The pressure on the yard was enormous. The instruction was very clear. We've got to solve this robbery.
Gold is unique. It's held a place of its own in the mind of man.
This is the inside story of Britain's biggest gold heist.
Gold is a symbol of power and dignity, symbol of love and lifelong devotion.
And the robbers racing to turn the gold into cash.
Gold is a pretty useless material. It's the last thing you would want on a desert island.
told by the police, who must hunt them down before it's too late.
Nations have fought for it. Men have died for it.
Failure would trigger a global crime wave and change Britain forever.
80% of all the gold that's ever been produced is behind bars. Because we think of gold as money, and we will do almost anything to get it.
Okay, go. I open the door at 6:30 and you come, because the alarms are running.
1 week